What's up everybody, this is Master Ian Gamer, and with Season 10 having finally introduced Brigitte into the competitive hero roster, our old Crusader friend is now finding himself in perhaps the least favorable position since the game launched. While having changed little himself over the years, the ever-changing Overwatch environment and opposing heroes have made it harder and harder for him to hold his ground, and with the announcement of Symmetra's upcoming rework details, it looks like the trend will only continue in the months to come. So in this video, I'm going to take the time to analyze why exactly he's in such a bad situation, and then offer some suggestions as for how Blizzard could fix Reinhardt to let him fight another day. Without further ado, let's jump right on in. So for starters, let's discuss what exactly has happened to Reinhardt over the past year or so. Back in his prime, he was a solid pick on most teams. His barrier was one of a kind, and he held immense power in the meta due to his ability to create space for the DPS on his team by blocking large areas from enemy fire. In fact, many people called him OP due to his unparalleled abilities, and the effects of this were seen by his high pick rate in both quick play and competitive. But then, a new challenger appeared. Wielding a barrier of her own, Orisa was added to help diversify the main tank lineup, and give players another option for providing their team with barriers. Now admittedly, Orisa herself had a fairly rough start, but through gradual buffs and changes, she finally became a solid hero pick as well. She by no means was identical to Reinhardt. For example, her Fortify ability provided her with great anti-crowd control, which is important to remember because I'll be coming back to that later. However, Orisa herself wasn't really the problem, especially since, as I said, she had her own rocky start to deal with. However, the bigger concern came from the heroes who followed Orisa, being Doomfist, Moira, and especially Brigitte. I'm going to talk about Moira first though, as her trouble for Rein is a bit simpler than the others. Reinhardt, more than anything else, is a shield. Sure, his hammer can do some damage and make for a great spearhead during a push, especially if he has the proper heals to back him up, but overall, his role is to stand there with his shield up, creating space for his DPS. Now, back in the ye olde days, there wasn't much outside of ultimates and melee attacks that could bypass his barrier. Symmetra's charged shots, his own fire strike ability, and Winston's Tesla cannon were the only things which he couldn't block, but these posed minimal threat in most situations, so it wasn't until the arrival of Moira that I think most people started to question the effectiveness of his barrier. Now, I don't think anybody would claim that his barrier is worthless, but the addition of Moira's Fushigi balls and coalescence has certainly rained on his parade. While she might not necessarily be a hard counter to Reinhardt, she definitely doesn't make playing him any easier when the two are on opposite teams. Additionally, the buffing of heroes like Reaper and Junkrat have meant that more damage is getting tossed around in general, which suddenly makes a 2000 HP barrier break surprisingly quickly. While Orisa has the luxury of being able to pop down a new one every 8 seconds, Reinhardt must let his recharge, which frequently makes him a significantly less effective tank for long periods of time. Also, with the announcement of Symmetra's rework details and the fact that her new primary weapon will now refill ammo when fired at a barrier and deals immense damage once charged up over long periods of time, the barrier play in Overwatch is undoubtedly in for a rough future. Now, barrier bypassing abilities and heavy damage sources do affect more heroes than just Reinhardt. Even with Orisa's 8-second cooldown, enough damage can put her in a pickle, but she has a second line of defense up her sleeve. When all barriers fail, activating Fortify oftentimes will give her enough survivability to fall back behind cover. Reinhardt, despite having 100 more HP than Orisa, has no last resort defense. He can try to turn around and charge away, but that still offers him no additional protection during his escape, and more often than not, he'll be gunned down in the time it takes for him to retreat. Even Winston with his barrier bubble has the ability to jump pack away when things go south. Now, a good Reinhardt or Orisa player would know how to effectively ration their barriers, and ideally would remain in a position where cover is readily available even before it ends up breaking. But it still stands that once the barrier breaks, Reinhardt in particular is oftentimes SOL. However, all the damage in the world couldn't compete with the single biggest problem that Reinhardt faces in this day and age, and that's crowd control. Crowd control, or CC, has always existed in Overwatch. McCree's Flashbang, Roadhog's Hook, even Rein's own Earthshatter ultimate have been in the game since launch. However, with the addition of the game's post-release heroes, this is where we've seen things start to maybe get a little bit out of hand. First, we had Ana with her Sleep Dart, then Sombra with Hack, Doomfist with just about every ability in his kit, and finally, Brigitte. In particular, these last two are the ones whom seem to be causing the biggest issue for Rein. Not only do Rocket Punch and Shield Bash stun, thus forcing Reinhardt to drop his barrier for a period of time, but they're also both melee abilities, meaning that they can pass right through his shield from any angle. Nowadays, it's by no means uncommon to face off against an enemy team who's capable of knocking you around in a borderline perpetual stun, especially if you're a big tank like Reinhardt, who is easily hit by many of these abilities. Once again, Reinhardt isn't the only hero to suffer from this change. Another example would be Roadhog, who can barely find room to use his ultimate without having it instantly cancelled. But when comparing Rein to his alternative barrier-based anchor tank, Orisa is much more equipped to counter this CC. The Fortify ability, which gives her emergency damage reduction, also serves to counter being crowd controlled, and if used properly, is the ticket to withstanding most rocket punches and shield bashes. Additionally, her ranged fusion driver and halt ability allow her to effectively keep her distance from CC heroes, and even the curve of her barrier better combats things like McCree's Flashbang, which can fairly easily be tossed over Reinhardt's flatter shield. Without a doubt, Orisa has a better chance here than Reinhardt, which oftentimes makes him feel more like an obsolete relic than a fair alternative. That being said, is there still hope for our old friend? Well, of course there is. The way I see it, there are two main directions Blizzard could take Reinhardt if they want to boost his effectiveness while not making him flat out OP. The first would be to give him some form of anti-CC. Whether it's partial or complete CC immunity, this would certainly help him against many of the more modern heroes. However, the big issue I see here is that it would risk making him too similar to Orisa. Orisa's Fortify is a fairly unique and defining aspect of her kit, so to mimic it in a hero who's already functionally very similar to her seems like something Blizzard would want to avoid. After all, they want every hero to feel unique, so doing this would probably undermine what little difference the two biggest main tanks already have. Therefore, I think CC immunity like Fortify would be impossible for Rein, but that doesn't mean he couldn't get something a little different. One of the most frustrating things to fall victim to as Reinhardt is a Lucio boop, or any other kind of dislocation ability. While Fortify also prevents this, I could see Reinhardt getting a passive ability where when his shield's up, he either can't be physically moved by the enemy at all, or at least have the distance he gets pushed reduced. This wouldn't affect being stunned, but it could still do him wonders. Rocket punches wouldn't displace him as much, and overall he'd stand more solid while defending his team. Alternatively, this passive ability could do the opposite, by preventing him from being stunned, but still allowing him to get moved. This certainly feels like it would be more effective with the current state of the game, as Brigitte really does seem to be Reinhardt's biggest threat. However, I'm not so sure that's entirely a bad thing. As I've been saying, Orisa is already well equipped to counter CC, so perhaps to help further define the differences between the two, Rein and Orisa could each be worked into their own respective niche. Orisa resists CC, and Rein could go the other main route I had in mind, which would be to buff his damage resistance. This could increase his survivability whenever he loses his shield, or even just make him stronger while standing with his barrier. Perhaps they increase the ratio of his health, which is armor, raising his health from 300 HP and 200 armor to 200 HP and 300 armor would certainly give him some more survivability. Honestly though, I don't think this would happen. He's already ungodly tanky in the right situations, and I think a change like this would easily make him OP in the right circumstances. So another way they could buff his damage resistance would be to modify his barrier shield. For example, maybe it could regenerate its health without having to be lowered, but still need to wait a short time after it last took damage in order for this to happen. Or they could just increase its total health, or even just the rate at which it recharges once lowered. Any of these would still increase his effectiveness as a tank, even if they don't counter the game's prevalent CC. But this would make him a better option when combating high damage heroes like Reaper or Junkrat, and then he can leave the anti-CC to Orisa. Overall, there are a lot of things that could be done to help make Reinhardt not only more effective, but also simply more fun to play. Disregarding just the disadvantages of being stunned constantly, it just feels horrible in general. Nobody has fun playing a hero who's just going to lock up every few seconds thanks to the enemy team, and given how strongly Blizzard has been known to focus on making things feel good in Overwatch, I think we can without a doubt expect to see some changes in the future. It's quite possible that the upcoming Hero 28 will somehow play into balancing things out, but that's a topic best saved for a future video. Anyways, thank you all for watching, and be sure to leave your thoughts down in the comments below. Do you agree that Reinhardt is in a tough spot? If so, what do you think could be done to help him? Share your opinion by voting in today's poll card, leave a like if you enjoyed this video, and share it with a friend if you really enjoyed it. Subscribe, follow me on Twitter, and turn on notifications to both help out my channel and keep up with all my future Overwatch content. This is Master Ian Gamer signing off, and until next time, have a great day.